In this lecture, we're going to be looking at functions in Excel, where our learning objectives are to properly use functions in Excel, understand the limitations of certain functions, given an Excel equation with built-in functions, predict the output, and interpret common error messages in Excel and offer possible solutions. So for formulas in Excel, the first character that's typed is the equal sign. Either cell type addresses are, you either type your cell addresses, for example B1, C1, or you just click them with your mouse. That's called point mode. The display box is, the name box is displaying the name of the cell in which you are working. The formula display is the current contents of the cell. It is going to display text or the formula that has been typed. So what is a function? A function performs a dedicated calculation. It accepts inputs from a list of arguments or parameters. It performs the calculation using the values of the arguments passed in, and it returns the calculated value. When do you use functions? Is your calculation long and involved? Do you perform the same task over and over using different input values? Do you reuse the calculation without having to retype it? Can you make a complex program easier? Do you need to document your results for the future? So these are some times when you might think about using a function. Some basic rules about functions in Excel. You have to use the correct function name. All functions are followed by parentheses. The argument of the function is the stuff in the parentheses, and it can include numbers, text, expressions, or cell references as long as they are appropriate for the function that is being used. Some screen tips pop up to show you the required arguments for that function. Trig functions have to be in radians, and you do not assume function names. For example, average is average, not AVE or AVG. You have to type out the full word average. Note pi is written in MATLAB as pi, open parentheses, close parentheses. Since pi is a function, you have to put the parentheses after it. Excel will not understand if you just write pi. And also, for example, sqrt is the square root function, but cube root is not a function, much like it was not a function in MATLAB. So what are some common functions in Excel? Well, we have a cos of a cell, which calculates the inverse cosine. There's also a sine. We have cosine and sine, which calculates the angle in radians. We have degrees, which converts an angle from radians to degrees. We have pi, which again you have to have your parentheses next to, and radians, which will convert an angle from degrees to radians. We also have the exp function for exponential, just like in Excel. We have power, which will raise a cell to a power. We have product, which will take the product of the list of cells. We have the square root, and we have the sum. One other function in Excel that we have is the concatenate function. It means to join things together. So if I do concat of A2, B2, or A2 and B2, you can use the ampersand as a shortcut for the concat function. It will join these cells together. So, for example, if in cell C2 I type concat B2 concatenate parentheses A2 comma quotation comma B2, it's going to join cells A2 and B2 together with a space between them. Putting quotation marks in Excel creates a blank space. So to run through some few examples, what is the cell address of the word Dabu in our example here? And then using cell conjugation with the ampersand operator, what formula would you type into a cell to create the word for equator? And then what do we want to get Dabo canoes? So Dabo is in A9. To type in to get for equator, well, 4 is in cell A7 and equator is in A8. So we would type in A7 and A8. And then to get Dabo canoes using the concat function, we would type in concat of A9, A5. Some basic statistical functions in Excel. We have the average, which returns the average of your cells. Max, which finds the max of a list of values. median, which finds the median of the list of value, min, which finds the minimum, standard deviation dot p, which finds the standard deviation of a list of cells, and variance dot p, which finds the variance of a list of cells. So let's look at an example. We have the properties of stainless steel listed here in a table, where we have the density in column C, the thermal conductivity in column D, the thermal expansion in column E, the specific heat in column F, and the resistivity in column G. What should we type into cell C12 to calculate the minimum value of the 8 densities that can also be copied to column D to G? So we're going to use a function and cell addressing. So the function we're going to use is the min function. We want the minimum of C4 is a C11, and since we want to drag it over into every column, we definitely do not want dollar signs next to our letters. You could put them next to the numbers, but you don't need to, since you're just dragging this over row by row and not up or down. So what would we type into cell C14 to find the range of the 8 density values that can then be copied? Well, the range is the maximum minus the minimum. So first we're going to calculate the maximum using the max function, and then we're going to subtract off the minimum using the min function. Another way to actually do this is to subtract the min and max from the values in rows 12 and 13. So what else are some miscellaneous functions in Excel? We have count, which will count the cells that contain numeric data. Count if counts if the stated criteria is met. Intercept finds the intercept of x and y values. Rounds a number to decimal places. Round up rounds a number up. Round down rounds a number down. Slope can find the slope. Truncates a number to specify number of digits. So much like in MATLAB, there's a bunch of different functions in Excel that I can't possibly list all of them for you. Those are some common ones that we might use. So let's look at some common error messages. If you see a bunch of pound signs in your cell, your cell is not wide enough, so you need to make the column wider. If you see pound divided by 0, it means you're dividing by 0 somewhere, so you have to check your equation. Pound name with the question marks, the cell does not recognize something that you've typed in. Null is the specified set of cells do not intersect. Value contains an invalid data type, so you should check that you're inputting what you need for that function. And A, the formula has called a value that's not available. Ref is an invalid reference. And num is formula results invalid for numerical types. You want to check your result is between the values that Excel accepts. So these are all typically caused by mistyping something. Then we have the if error function. The if error function tells you if an error is going to occur, and then formats that cell accordingly. So if cell C4 contains the statement equals if error of value comma if value if error, C4 and column A has a 0 in it, so I'm dividing by 0. This is the result you would see when the error occurs. But if I use the if error statement where I put in my value, which is going to be my equation, the value if error I'm going to put in blank, I'm going to create this blank space here. So if cell C4 is B4 divided by A4, I'm going to get an error because I'm dividing by 0. If I type into cell C4 if error B4 divided by A4, so that's the value I want. And if there's an error, I'm going to put my 2 quotation marks next to each other to create a blank in Excel, and this creates a blank space in my table instead of the divide by 0. So we're going to work on another example that has to do with the mass and radius, mass and weight of spheres. That has a note with if error. We'll set the gravity to 1.6 meters per second squared, which is the gravity of Earth's moon, if an error occurs in typing in the gravity cell. So we're altering the radius in row 19 right here. If text is entered, Excel will produce the error shown in column E, which is saying value because it's expecting a number and getting text. What should we type into cell D20 that we can then copy over and down through this table to leave the cells blank if an error is made? So we're going to use our if error function, and the first thing in our if error function is the function we want to is the result that we want if there is no error. So what we want to calculate is the radius of this, the volume of this sphere with the given radius, which is given in C19, times 4/3 times pi. Notice I have my empty parentheses here for pi, times my radius cubed. So it's I'm calculating the mass, so it's my density times my volume. So my density is in column C, and it's always in column C, so I want to lock the first part of this so it can't change from C as I drag over, but I do need to change the rows. Then for my radius, it's in row 19. This should be a 19, and it's always in row 19. But the column changes, and here if I have an error, it has going to create my blank again. This should be a 19, not an 18. So the user then alters the gravity in G32. If text is entered, we want Excel will again produce an error. What should we type into cell D32 that can be replicated down and across the cells to calculate the weight using the value in G32? If a number is entered and using 1.6, if the value in G32 is entered as text. So again, we're using our if error function, and we're going to calculate the weight, which is our mass that we calculated in the previous table, divided by 1,000 to get into the right units, times G32, and it's always times G32, so we're going to lock both the row and the column. And then we're going to do the calculation. If there's an error, it's still my mass divided by 1,000, then it's times 1.6. This 1.6 is a constant that we're using in the problem, so we're not referencing a cell. So that's it for the basics of Excel functions, and that's how basic functions work. In the next lecture, we're going to look at a function specific to Excel that's useful for looking up data called VLOOKUP.